You know, politics are nothing without policy and the exchange of ideas. Many would agree that politics should be a two-way street of communication where there's a meeting of the minds. But too often, however, the ideas that bring the spark to the conversation are overshadowed by the power and the ambition of personal careers and gains and campaigns. Joining us to talk about the benefits of good public policy is David Leis of the Frontier Centre for Public Policy. He joins us from Abbotsford, British Columbia. David is also the host of Leaders on the Frontier, which is part of Return to Reason, airing on Miracle Channel. David, welcome to Bridge City News.
Great to be here, Hal.
David, let's begin with this question. Can you explain why Canadians should really care about public policy?
Well, I think it makes everything in terms of our lives. It's choices about the small things to the big things. So, in many ways, it determines what kind of lives we're going to lead. Is it one of hope and prosperity, or is it one of, well, frankly, bad things? I mean, we have a lot of choices that we need to make in our country today.
So how does the Frontier Centre for Public Policy get involved in Canada's political landscape, whether it's provincially or federally?
We try to examine issues based on facts and evidence. We have a bias, and that is towards a free and democratic society. We believe in the age-old traditions of a respect for individual rights and freedoms. And we try to be very discerning in terms of certain principles that empower individuals. So we will look at issues from healthcare to transportation, taxation, economic performance, and we say, look, how does that help the individual and communities go forward in a successful way?
So what are your thoughts on the carbon taxes, which are impacting so many Canadians, including our farmers right now across Canada?
Well, we think that policy, as an example, is really bad. It disempowers individuals to be able to live their lives. It doesn't do what it claims it to do in terms of protecting the environment. All those carbon taxes go back right into general revenues. So it's a bit of a farcical policy. It's really not about policy. It's about appearing to be policy.
Now, you've had a wide variety of senior leadership roles within the government, industry, education, and First Nations. What made you make the switch over to a policy think tank?
You know, I've been a supporter of the frontier for quite a long time, and I just really think we need to elevate the level of thinking. So I was approached a number of years ago about helping out more actively with Frontier, and I said yes, and it just kind of grew from there. And the center's just blossoming, and I just really feel honored to help be part of that discussion that serves Canadians.
Now, David, when you present well thought out policies to our federal government, the Trudeau government, what kind of response do you get, if any?
Well, we get a number of responses. We have people who are, for instance, elected officials and bureaucrats, and a number of us have been in those senior roles. So we know what it's like to be in office. And the response can either be one of appreciation, welcoming that there's a group of well-intended team of experts and former officials that take the time to carefully examine and look at the evidence. Because often when you're in power, you don't really have any time to look at those issues in more depth. So it takes a lot of effort. So people appreciate that.
What are your thoughts on the Trudeau government and their just transition policy, just transitioning away from the energy sector, oil and gas, more into green technology? What are your thoughts in that regard?
Well, if you look at the just transition policy, it's really a just transition, we would say, to nowhere. We would say it's actually not policy based on reality, unfortunately, in the sense that what we're looking at is a transition that is really all about shutting down the oil and gas industry. And we think this will have enormously negative impacts on people, the industry. Um, this is going to negatively impact families big time. So we think it's a disaster. We need affordable energy in our country. That's been historically a great strength in terms of our economy. And to call this a just transition all about, quote, the environmental climate change is really an overstatement. We think that over 80 years, the debate is about 1 degree over 80 years. And so we think that that's really an overreaction to what's going on. We've always had climate change, and what we have now is really we would say a kind of an effort to really shut down all fossil fuels really under the false moniker of a crisis when in fact it is not.
So, how do you think Alberta can really fight back? I know Premier Daniel Smith has talked about the Alberta Sovereignty Act in the past to protect oil and gas workers here across the province. It's a big industry, right? And it also helps support the equalization payments, which make their way to central and eastern Canada. Do you think maybe that Daniel Smith would eventually invoke that Sovereignty Act?
I think that there's elements of it that need to be invoked in the sense that this is an existential threat to, I would argue, not just simply Alberta's economy, but Canada. And it begs the question, how does Alberta, let alone other provinces, work together to rebalance our federal system? Our federal system never envisioned the federal government basically trying to take over everything. Our partners in our federation are the provinces and the federal government, and they need to work together. But the federal government is now intruding systematically in every provincial area. So we would say that that balance is out of whack, and it needs to be confronted now before it's too late.
So, David, how would you say that a policy institute like the one you're with right now meets the true needs of Canadians?
Well, I mean, if you believe that individual rights and freedoms, if economic freedom and the traditions that have served our country so well, and not just Canada, but in the Anglo-Saxon tradition going back in the UK some thousand years, then that's what we're trying to serve Canadians about, trying to empower them to make the decisions about how they're going to live their lives as they see fit, and not um, frankly be run by the authority of the state. And I think that's what we need to do, is realize that today a lot of actors are really special interests that are all about guiding you to serve their interests and not yours.
Now, we've chatted a bit about public policy in your role at the Frontier Centre for Public Policy, David, but you're also the host of Leaders on the Frontier. Can you talk about the role your program really provides for Canadians?
Well, we really want to bring in some of the extraordinary thinkers and people involved in all aspects of Canadian life, and certainly around the world, who talk about these different areas of public policy and bring them alive. So we look at the pros and cons of issues and try to bring really a new light and understanding that a lot of people never hear about. If you listen to a lot of the mainstream media, unfortunately, you won't hear about issues and how they're really impacting your life and what's really going on in terms of these debates. Um, so I'm excited to be very much involved in that program, to host it. I think it's a great legacy in terms of the Return to Reason initiative that Leon Fontaine started, and so it's just an honor to be part of that.
You know, David, there's been so much political competition for ideas going after the hearts and minds of Canadians, especially here in Alberta. What do you think really needs to be done to see a bit of a policy shakeup in our country?
You know, there's so many levels. We need better information. There's a lot of work to try to censor or manipulate information, and information is critical to any democracy. And I would say that one of the things that we need to do is get more citizens involved in the democratic process. A lot of elites who run our country are very happy if people are passive and kind of lethargic and on the sidelines. We need to promote better informed citizens that are active in every aspect of our democracy.
A couple of months ago, I had the honor and the opportunity to interview CPC leader Pierre Poilievre. He says Canada is broken, and he listed a whole laundry list of reasons why he thought our country is broken. Now, many people think that our finances are in disarray, and especially with the budgets right now. What are your thoughts in that regard?
Well, there are many major challenges that Canada faces, and Canada is an incredible country. We have historically been one of the most prosperous, free, and tolerant and kind nations on the planet. But our country's changing, and I think it's changing for the bad, the worst, in the sense that we have a lot of efforts that are undermining our freedoms. I think we are also declining in terms of our economic performance. We're losing business investment. So there's a whole series of indicators that we could systematically look at that would say that Canada is on a decline, and there's reasons for that. And I would say first and foremost, are the fact that we've been implementing some pretty disastrous policies. I think you mentioned the so-called just transition. There's been many actions that the federal government's taken before that are part of that trend. So it's incumbent on Canadians to wake up and understand what's going on for the sake of our country, but for the sake of the next generation.
Now, this last provincial election we had in Alberta, there was a lot of talk of Alberta separating, being its own sovereign nation, going its own way. Then there were other parties as well. Political leaders were talking about, why don't we just join forces with the rest of Western Canada and separate as well? What are your thoughts on those who want to see the West being best and leaving Canada altogether?
Well, I would hope that it wouldn't come to that. I think it's a very difficult path to map out credibly. In this day and age, it's in our benefit to work together as a federation. I think the original vision that was struck by the founders of our country, including Sir John A. Macdonald, was a brilliant one. But I would say that the balance in our federation is not balanced between the federal and provincial governments. And it's incumbent on the provinces, including Alberta, definitely Saskatchewan, and hopefully British Columbia and Manitoba, to work together. It's that kind of teamwork that will empower that kind of movement to empower the provincial side of the governments.
So speaking of teamwork, David, how can we improve and maybe smooth over the rough waters with Ottawa and the Trudeau government?
I think that I think actions speak louder than words, and I think that action after action has shown in the past that this government is not necessarily willing to work with provincial levels of government. And I think what you need to do is again work together as a provincial team with the federal government. I think that you need to look at a full court press in terms of using all the tools, whether it's legal, persuasion with citizens, to realize that this is not going well. We're on a path that will really change and undermine not only our freedoms, but our standard of living. And so people need to wake up to that reality.
Are there certain policies that you're looking at as well with the Frontier Centre for Public Policy to be in more support of our farming communities, our agricultural communities, which are the bread and butter of our economy here?
Absolutely. There's a couple ones. One is the fact that we're very concerned about these so-called net zero policies, this just transition, as you talked about, because all of that is not going to just simply impact negatively our oil and gas industry. It's a domino effect, Hal, that will cascade right across every industry, whether it's plastics, manufacturing, forestry, mining, and guess what? Agriculture as well. So when they talk about redefining how people are going to farm, and the federal government inserting itself in the lives of farmers and telling them how to farm in terms of all kinds of issues, these will be disastrous.
David, how can people find out more information about the Frontier Centre for Public Policy and your program, Leaders of the Frontier?
Well, I would encourage them to look at our website, sign up for our newsletter, and look at all those kinds of resources. And I would also encourage them to sign up for the Return to Reason newsletter, which is part of that wonderful family of programs, including Leaders on the Frontier.
On Miracle Channel. David Leis is with the Frontier Centre for Public Policy, joining us from Abbotsford, British Columbia. Thanks so much for your time today, David.
Thank you, Hal.